Today we're going to get to talk about spiritual awakening and powerful relationships. It doesn't have to just be spiritual awakening, it just can be powerful relationships in general as we're walking on the spiritual path. And really, what awakening is doing is it's unleashing your own power. It's allowing you to connect to yourself. And so fundamentally your first powerful relationship you get to work with is you. The more connected we are with ourselves, the more powerful we become. And this is primarily what people get most upset by, as far as awakening goes, is our own power, running up against our own limitations, our own perceived limitations. It's like water running up against a dam, and that pressure builds. But when the dam breaks, everything flows more deeply, more naturally, and that makes us even more powerful within our own space. And there's great power in being able to be with any inner experience that you may have. Keep in mind, we spend a lot of our time actually trying to insulate ourselves from ourselves. We think it's the external world. So it's like you don't want to see your ex-lover for whatever reason because you'll feel bad, but that's not your ex-lover making you feel bad unless they actually physically harm you. That's an emotional choice. A part of you is deciding inside that you're going to feel bad. You see this person, this is your reason to feel bad about yourself. On the spiritual path, we do a couple of things where we say, I'm in charge of what I choose to feel and when I choose to feel and how I choose to feel it. And by doing that, it becomes a more powerful place because you're not being controlled by your fear of your own emotions, your own inner experience. People can't make you be afraid. You choose to be afraid. And this is the powerful thing, and it goes so counterintuitively to what everybody has been taught for most of their lives, which is always to focus on the external world, that the external world is doing something to you. And you either have to fight it, join with it, avoid it, right, so that you can feel good about yourself. It's not true. And the more you open to your own inner power, the more you start to attract external powerful relationships, which we'll talk about. And because I am often people's first or one of the few very powerful relationships they've ever been around, I'll talk a lot about myself and the work as being a spiritual teacher. Because it's very unsettling to connect to somebody like me who's sitting in his power, who's more actively choosing his emotions. I won't say I choose all my emotions. Sometimes they choose me. But even those I can look at with awareness. That's a very different thing. And that creates me as a very different type of person to connect with. And that sort of power calls to other people. It's the power of love, unconditional acceptance. And it calls to that part of you that remembers the truth. So much of the spiritual path really is of remembering. And so when you sit around a powerful person like myself who's cultivating himself to be kind of a tuning fork to help people remember, there's that rising up. That rising up says, oh, wow, I remember. The more deeply I sit in my own space, and the more clear I am, the more connected I am to the space of oneness, which we're always all a part of, the more that response tends to build in other people, especially those who are already energy sensitive. So there's this upwelling inside, which tends to drop a whole load of emotional experiences and memory and old pain and stuff like that. And so one of your lessons in working with any powerful spiritual teacher is to own your inner experience. To be unmindful in the space is to blame the external person for making you upset. I mean, especially with the work that I do, sometimes I'm not saying you're doing anything. So there's no rational reason that somebody should be upset. There's just this arising. And so you have your basic choices. You can accept this arising, you can resist it with whatever powerful people are in your life. Often before awakening, and sometimes after awakening, you have that soulmate person show up. And the soulmate really, they tend to show us the things we don't want to see about ourselves, but yet we feel so powerfully connected to them, we can't think that we can have them out of our lives. And then depends on what that term means to you, that it becomes more or less toxic or problematic. If we only think of soulmates as romantic people, then other people who are doing that sort of function of kind of counterbalancing themselves. This is the idea of finding your other half. The soulmate kind of is that person who, if you're introverted, they're extroverted, right? They're always, needing to learn how to go inside, and you need to learn to come outside. Just keep coming back to yourself. It's so easy to get caught up in the external world. And really, your power is going to come from the loss of relating. And this is kind of a funny thing to talk about in terms of relationship, but that sense of connection is actually a loss of duality. It's that sense where, like, whoever I am goes away, and you feel connected to life, to other people. And this is really what people want. Sometimes, and it's not too often because people aren't very mindful with their bodies, and there's so many triggers with the body, but every now and then I'll do something with touch with a student. And so you can do something simply as just like holding two hands and doing it mindfully and stepping into that space with care. And then pretty soon at some point, if you're both really open, it just feels like there's one hand. That sense of separation is gone, which means the relating is over. Right? Because relating is one-to-one meeting another. And when we're really dropping into it, there is no other. And that's the space of connection that we're often yearning for. But it always starts with ourselves. But the more at one and at peace we are, then we can do our part with anybody in the physical world. So part of relating is always going to start with how you relate with yourself and all the rules you have about when you can feel different things. And that's a big thing, because we have a lot of rules. It's like I can be happy when this happens, but I can't be happy when that happens. I want to have this feeling, but I don't want to have that feeling, and we have to embrace all of our feelings. And typically what a spiritual awakening does is it turns up all the unpaid bills, all the stuff we didn't want to deal with. And up it comes, and it rises up, and here's all this junk just sitting in front of us. We have to deal with it. People on what I call the conscious path. The conscious path is the path we all ultimately have to turn to, whether we have an awakening or not. Awakening is just this profound way that we connect to the truth. And you're never the same again. And it tends to have this phase where it's just moving through your life in cycles and waves. It's just always happening. It doesn't really stop. It can calm down, but it doesn't have that quality where, like, you're running the show in the way that you were before. And for a while, you feel like you're not running the show at all. The more aware we become, the more we join with that momentum and that sort of natural growth, and understand that as our deepest intelligence now at work, which moves us towards the conscious path. And that's where we become more aware. Be more aware takes time and growth and getting to know ourselves, where awakening embraces all we are as perfect in this moment. It always has and always will. That's the beauty of the awakened space. So it embraces you whether you're locked up and powerless or whether you're completely in your power. A lot of what you'll see in the world and the external people are just mirrors. At least initially. Mirroring back different parts of yourself that you may like or you may not like. Sometimes we'll have different mirrors during the early parts of awakening because we need to see different parts of ourselves that we couldn't see before. And we tend to draw in certain types of people because we're trying, once again, it's a lot about insulating ourselves. And so they tend to not be particularly powerful because if somebody's particularly powerful, then they're churning stuff up inside. They're forcing us to deal with ourselves. Not necessarily because they're intentionally doing it, like I would be doing, but just by their nature, their presence, the nature of your interaction. So to be better able to handle those mirrors and the things that you see around you and the people that you draw in, you have to be better able to handle the things going on inside of you. And I think there's a big cultural message and a big biological message that we don't want to feel pain. That has to go. At least as far as emotional pain is, because physical pain is a different thing. And that's not usually what we're confronted with, is it? What we're usually confronted with is emotional pain, some sort of mental duress. We're not liking how life is going or something like that, right? Something doesn't match up to our ideas. Our ideas are really useless, at least in the unconscious state. Part of what we do is a huge clean-out process of beliefs and ideas that don't actually fit reality. That's another aspect of the different mirrors and people that you may draw into your life. But they're actually oftentimes, along with showing you parts of yourself you don't like, showing you more of the truth that doesn't fit your story. There's all kinds of stories going on in the world. Like some people think the world is going into hell in a handbasket. Other people think we're awakening, and they're using that in the term of becoming more conscious. And there's all sorts of stories and ideas people are at work with, and they're not interesting. What's more interesting is being here now and seeing what ideas are limiting us. Do that first. As we clear that out, then we can come back and we can create other ideas and goals and things that are in the future that are useful to move things in certain directions, like having a more sustainable community, right? You know, driving electric vehicles or hydrogen or fuel cell vehicles, right, that aren't polluting the air and, you know, causing all sorts of problems with the environment and things like that, right? We can create those ideas more effectively the more clear we are ourselves, the more we're in our own power. So for those who are just joining, I'm really relating the whole sense of powerful relationship as how you are with yourself. Because most of us aren't allowing ourselves to be powerful at all. That's what fear does. Fear limits you from your experiences of yourself. It says, I'm going to be hurt or harmed or something like that. And more often than not, it leads us to more fear and more emotional hurt and harm than anything else. It's really completely backwards. So as always, I encourage you to have a journal, and you can write down your different ideas about who you are, what you're supposed to get, what you're supposed to do, where you're supposed to go, what you're trying to avoid, what you think you don't want. These are all the ways that you inhibit your own power. And it inhibits the type of people who can be in your life. I don't want you to confuse power with control. manipulating yourself or manipulating others. I don't want you to confuse power with attempting to get what you want. That's an ego idea. The beauty of our power is it actually asks nothing of anyone. It asks nothing of ourselves. We just allow ourselves to be. And there's no story to that. The minute we start getting caught up in a story, we're losing our power again. Because now we have to be somebody. And that means we can't be this other thing. And we're so dynamic, so flexible and agile in our natural state of awareness that we can do and be anything. The unconscious ego doesn't understand this because the unconscious ego starts to make these exaggerations from it. Well, if I can be and do anything, I can go and kill people with chemical weapons. It's like, come down to this space and find out. Find out what happens the more you connect in oneness, if that's even in your conscious awareness to attack people with chemical weapons. Because primarily, you're going to find out it's not. Right? This is not a mental game I'm playing here. It's not a mental game I'm encouraging any of you towards. I'm encouraging you to be powerful people. And powerful people don't need stories to define you, define us. We really aren't attempting to be anybody on the spiritual path. We don't need to be avatars or all these different words and ideas that are just new ego ways of trying to make us feel special because we already don't feel special, because we cut ourselves off from our power and our love. It's just so completely backwards. Right? So much of the work we do together is you are coming down to those deeper levels where at some point you believed you were not good enough as you are. You have to believe that to interact and with much of society in the way that you do now. Because when you start to step out of that, a lot of society is not going to know what to do with you, which will force you further on your growth. Because it's going to force you to have to decide, it's like, am I still trying to people please to make myself feel validated because I don't feel good enough about myself? Or do I keep letting this go? What people say is what people say. You know, this putting aside the edge cases where somebody is being violent towards you. Like this, as I said, it's an agile space, so we're not creating a new story because sometimes you're in a life or death situation and you're lying to save your life. Right? So that becomes the truth of the moment, which isn't honest in the strictest terms. Right? You see where ideas and words don't work well. But most of the time, we're being honest and truthful in what we have to say because we're not under immediate threat. The ego is always under threat for something. It's always trying to get something, trying to protect something. Even if what it's trying to get is only acknowledgement from others. And you choose your responses. That's part of being a powerful person. And that will change how you relate with people. And the soulmates, twin flames, and romantic things are particularly powerful because we put energy into them. We've been taught that that's where our happiness and our approval are going to be for a variety of reasons. So in seeking that, that's part of what brings out all sorts of emotions and things like that. And if we're mindful, we can grow a great deal there. But these are just the beginning. Those are the ones that people look for the most, so that's why they find it so much. And we don't have that much language for all the different types of powerful relationships. So let's take it to something like having a coworker, correct? And you and this coworker work so well together. You're just amazing together, what you can do and what you can form. And the way the business thrives around you, or the nonprofit, or whatever it happens to be, or your government agency, right? And being, maybe you're two social workers, and you just are able to do more together than you could do separately. That's a powerful relationship. And they exist. And it's a different, it'll have its own quality of power to get used to, of how that dynamic works. And, and sometimes you need space apart from that. It's like, wow, you can just get yourself so cranked up into that space. And that's one type of dynamic power. Not all of them are doing. Okay, and that's another important thing to understand. We live in a society that is constantly telling us to validate ourselves because we're not good enough, remember? Right? This is one of those big core lies that we're all hiding. If you don't want to admit it, then now's a good time to start admitting it yourself. That's the only reason you need to people please and do a whole bunch of this other stuff, is if you don't think you're good enough as you are. So doing has nothing to do with being. But being isn't prohibiting doing. The more we come into that space of being, we know when we need to take action for anything, like working and getting resources to have a home and eat and those types of things. It's very simple. And then we can let it go. Come back to being. And so part of what's building up in the power here for you is that you're not wasting energy. It's a lot of wasted energy doing way too much. And it's kind of heating up the world. We're driving all over the place and doing all these different things and working way too many hours and all that sort of stuff, trying to get someplace we don't really understand, which is a never-ending thing. We just keep going and consuming and more, right? Constantly doing. And it's extremely wasteful. Exhausting resources on this planet. It's exhausting us. And when you're exhausted, you don't have much power. You don't have much ability to do things, to think clearly, to see clearly, to love deeply. You're all out of gas. And that's how most people are. They're trapped, powerless, exhausted. I just had a post go up today about sleep issues. I don't think I mentioned this one, but a lot of times when spiritual awakening comes, the fact of the matter is you're just finding out that you're already sleep deprived. You haven't been sleeping, right, for years. So now you're sleeping all the time. So there are many, many kinds of powerful relationships. Not necessarily where you would expect them. Some relationships just work in such surprising ways. They're just alive. I mean, that's another aspect of true power. It's a space of aliveness. Maybe it's not the overt type of love that you would normally call love, okay? Because love is the type of term I use for everything, that it embraces everything, it is everything. That's a higher truth. It's different than joy, right? Some things give us joy and pleasure, and other things are not enjoyable and not pleasurable. That's duality. But there's a quality of aliveness regardless. And this is another thing that we're always seeking, and this is part of what makes us powerful. And the more we're in this aliveness, the more we can interact with other people who are alive, and that's not threatening to us. Because once again, the deadened, numbed out, exhausted ego self that we're all living in is highly threatened by alive people in a lot of respects, or it's trying to use them. That comes up as well. Strangely enough, I'm getting more so those people with strange agendas who are trying to use me in some sort of way. I mean, it's not like I give into it. It's pretty obvious to see what people are up to. And so those types of things where like somebody's like trying to interview me about some topic that is just really bizarre and I'm not interested in it anyway because it's just them trying to use me, and then you just say no and you set those boundaries. Because that's part of being in a powerful place is you're seeing things more clearly. You don't see everything. But those people who are more sycophantic, they're just going to be parasites or just lost in their own issues. You can see that. That also makes space for powerful relationships. When you're surrounded by people who are just lost in these other types of things, you don't have much space for it. The only reason you're surrounding yourselves with them is because you think you need something from them. I have a couple questions over here from Jackie. I'm facing the situation where I'm becoming more powerful and aware of being on a higher vibration is starting to cause issues in my personal relationship. And I would be very cautious with all those words you just said because it sounds like you're saying you're better than people. Maybe that's not what you mean, but I would be very, very cautious about that because we're all at where we're all at, and that's all perfect, and it's all embraced. As we deepen into this space, into being, we'll notice that there are already issues in a personal relationship, and that's different, okay? So now this is awareness, seeing something there rather than causing problems is more like, oh, well, I'm so much better, I'm going to make my partnership better and try to adjust it somehow. And this happens a lot, where I get people like emailing, it's like, but my partner, they're so not like this, and how do I fix them? She said, that's an ego thing. That is not a person who's more spiritual. They're just putting on spiritual clothes. Right? Being accepts everything as it is. Now, as we drop into awareness, as I said, when we're mindful, we start to actually look at what the relationship actually is. You'll start to notice that there are already issues. And then you have a choice with you and your partner about how you eliminate them and how you choose to work together through them. Good partnerships will love you, even though they're not conscious or on the spiritual path, but that love is consciousness. And some people will go to great lengths for that love for you if you give them the chance. And if you speak to them in that space, from that space of love, that comes from, once again, that ego that's trying to better yourself on the spiritual path, you're going to get in a lot of trouble, you're going to get a push-pull, you'll start to look for the better relationship, which is also coming out of a whole lot of social programming about how you're supposed to have romantic relationships. And people don't really ever question that. And for any of you there in this particular session, I always encourage you to question, why do you have a romantic relationship, or why do you want one? And be very honest with yourself, and be very hard on yourself, because so much of this is so deeply ingrained and entrenched in our minds that this is what we're supposed to do. We don't really understand it. And I can give you my answers, but I'm not going to today. Somebody's already heard them. Because it's important to play the process of understanding how you got here. I see another comment here from Jackie. I still can feel when my twin flame is thinking about me. Am I making this up, or is this real? Both. But that's not relevant. The relevance is more around like what your connection is there, what you want. Once again, I take issue with soulmate, twin flame, and twin souls, all those types of names that are also just more reflections of this deep cultural imperative that you're supposed to have a romantic partnership of some importance. And through media, we have built up this idea of this grand person. It's usually just one. And that we have to have, and they're going to make us feel good all the time or something like that. And generally speaking, with the powerful relationships, they don't make you feel good. And they start to draw out a lot of your issues. So this is a big thing too. With romantic stuff, you have to start to ask these deeper questions to be like, what am I trying to get? What's up here? Because otherwise we're just going to be putting Band-Aids on top of wounds with bullets in them. And that's going to make things worse, and you're not going to get to these deeper spaces of love and appreciation for the wonderful people who are in your life already that you've drawn in. I have a clarification. I think I said that wrong. Awareness is helping you to be more positive and more energetic, in personality more full of love. I feel disconnected from my partner. I'm having more of a difficult time explaining this. Sorry, I hope that makes sense. Well, I think there's still more work here. I don't think you said it wrong, because now you're still evaluating and judging yourself to be more positive, which means you've rated everything and judged everything about yourself in your life between positive and negative. That's the ego heart at work. To be more energetic and personality is another judgment to say that that's better than being lethargic. And sometimes we're lethargic and we're like at peace. I mean, sometimes you'll hear the different masters and mystics talk about the mystic is the laziest person there is. So I think there's a lot here for you to journal about. This is a big thing that I talk about, from who you're trying to be and what you're trying to get. because that's going to keep hiding out, and it wants to hide out. Understand that the way I teach is very different than what a lot of other teachers are doing. They'll let you hide out behind a whole load of ego and spiritual clothes to try and make yourselves feel good and all that sort of stuff. But when we get rid of the thing that feels bad, and why we've decided to feel bad, because it tends to hang out down there at the fundamental levels, then all this other stuff we're trying to do goes away. Because all this other stuff is a retort to these fundamental things that either we feel bad, we don't feel safe, we hate ourselves. There's a lot of it in Western culture. And thank you, Jackie, for your comments and having the bravery to do that with me. As you're noticing, I'm a very direct person, and that's part of the power of the work that I do with people. Is we're not dancing around. We're not playing games. I'm not here to make you feel better because I want to get to the thing that's making you feel bad, because when you get rid of that, nobody needs to make you feel better because you already feel great. And if something difficult comes, you don't resist it, so you don't keep it, so you don't perpetuate pain, and you generally come back to peace and feeling loving and open, and it's fantastic. And this is what people are talking about with emptiness and non-action, and it's like those are really weird terms, and we're like, what the do I do with that term, right? It is a space that when there's nothing agitating ourselves, nothing that feels bad or upset, we come into spaces of peace and relaxation. That's always the greatest news of all, that you don't have to try to get here. You're already here. What we're looking for are all the things that keep taking you out of it. It's just been so habitual and so practiced. It's been so practiced to give up our power constantly to these actions that we think we have to take to be somebody, to get things and so on, that it seems normal. But it's not. I have another question to me. So I want to cut off from my relatives. At the same time, I realize they are teaching me strong lessons. I'm quite conflicted with how to deal with this. Conversation with them is hard. The past has been tough. Well, I can't tell you what to do. Sometimes we step out of these difficult relationships for a while so we can find our center. If you've never stepped out of it, I can't say it's something you should or shouldn't do, because the more you can be at peace with any situation, the more powerful you are. So that's part of the power of any sort of relatives that we have, is they tend to show us more things about ourselves because they're where we learn them all. The more deeply we can come into that space of peace, the more powerful we are. And then we are actually choosing the next choice as opposed to running away or avoiding parts of ourselves we don't like. So thank you for that question from Deidre. You mentioned fear, and indeed is a stumbling block to many openings, I feel. How do you accept, befriend your own fear in order to move beyond? Because you have no other choice. You literally have no other choice. You can resist it and keep it around, because that's what resistance does. Or you can accept it and befriend it, as you say, and start to process it. The critical step is to not believe it. You only believe it in the sense that you're feeling it. If that's your felt experience, then that's what's here, right? It's very, very logical. It's here. If you're feeling it, it's here. But then what we like to do is we create a story around it, and the mind starts to wrap around it, and then we start to turn it around and around and around and around, and it just starts to go, right? And so we're constantly recreating the fear. And so this is energizing it. And so it's kind of like a fan that gets built up with a lot of energy. So when you first start to unplug that fan, it doesn't stop, does it? It just keeps going because you've been energizing that fear forever and ever and ever. But eventually, as you're watching it, right, this is the practice in the space of the witness, as you're feeling it, right, you're not cutting off from your experience. You're breathing into it. It starts to lose energy. It starts to dissolve. If you notice you're starting to believe in a story again, write it down. Talk to a friend. Talk to a spiritual teacher like myself or a healer, because you want to get that out in the open. Whenever we put fear out in the open, and you probably already know this, you all probably know this, when you put it out in the open, it starts to sound ridiculous. That's your own awareness starting to show the lie. Fear works best when it's in the dark, in our ignorance, in our avoidance, in our repression. So as I said, you have no other choice but to experience it and accept it because it's already here. But let's be careful about moving beyond, because we're human beings and all of our experiences are embraced by love, including fear. And so sometimes fear, which is really a big biological thing, right? It's meant to help us run away from threats, but we use it constantly for whatever reason. So it's useful to have that burst where it's like, oh, the cars are stopping fast in front of me. I'm going to press the brake really quickly, right? That's part of what fear does, right? There's that rush of adrenaline, all that sort of stuff. But we keep hitting that inner button on ourselves, and it's not helpful. And ultimately, I believe as we become more conscious, we won't need to do that because we'll be able to clearly see things and take effective action without having an instinctual program pulling the strings. What other questions do people have? Thank you to all of you who have asked questions. I appreciate it. Gidra, that is so true about helpfulness of writing the fearful story down. Thank you. You're welcome. It happens all the time in my sessions where I'll be drawing it out. I'll ask for someone, what are you afraid of? And they start talking about it, and like they can barely get halfway through, but it's just that this is ridiculous, But yet I believe that getting it out there, getting it seen, you can't hide. That's another aspect of being a powerful person is you're not hiding. Hiding takes a lot of energy. Being seen requires none, but we typically go through phases of getting comfortable with being seen, being open, being vulnerable. Vulnerability is usually considered a bad thing because in the past other people may have used it in their lives, but vulnerability is actually the only sane thing we can do, to be open and fully clear in the present moment. Then we can take appropriate action. If we're closed, we can't see everything. Hi, Angeli. My question is, what are you supposed to do to react or just observe when resistance comes up? Sometimes I'm attached to an outcome like wanting vacation time when I plan for it from my boss, but if I don't get it, I feel a sense of disappointment. Am I supposed to observe my attachment or react? Well, this is going to be a little bit of a semantics thing where I'll say you're never supposed to react. You want to choose your actions. So I'm just making that distinction because I want react to be in the category of the ego, where choosing actions is in the category of the conscious mind. And that both of them can come after you observe. It's like, well, so you're attached to certain things. But I mean, the question you're asking me here, Angela, since we've talked about in past sessions, is a little bit more complicated because it has to do with your dynamics with people in places of authority, which isn't actually power, right? So there's a way that we're used to giving up our real power to people in these places of social authority, and because of that, that puts us into these spaces where we may not be able to meet the needs we have, or we don't feel honored and things like that. And certainly as we let go of those deeper issues like I was talking about, of not feeling good enough, not feeling safe, feeling a sense of unworthiness and self-hate, it's easier to be with anybody, any boss that's kind of a pain in the butt, which is the most important work. But there are times still, as we get clear, that we'll just leave. Because if a boss truly isn't like engaging us appropriately, there's no reason to stick around. But this one's a multi-level issue here, Angela. So I can't give you too generic of a response. That'd be too reductive. It wouldn't really honor your situation. You're welcome. You're also welcome, teacher. What other questions do people have? Anybody who hasn't asked yet, you're welcome to do so. I mean, the fun side of powerful relationships, the more you're in your own power and connecting with other people. It's just how dynamic and alive they are, and what they do, and how they grow. Right? They're not all going to be challenging and bringing up junk all the time, but that tends to be, as I said, our first step, because we have a lot of unpaid bills, a lot of fear and sadness and anger and shame and guilt that we haven't want to really face, and we have to face that. And it's kind of like pent-up old energy. It just needs to decharge, and it can go on for a while. And if we keep believing in it and creating stories around it about why we feel sad, like still getting lost about the ex-lover, right, then you're just regurgitating. So you'll keep that going, so you have to let go of that story. Deidre is asking about, what about doubt? Where does that belong? Can I have a context? I mean, doubt's definitely the ego. It wants something, and it doesn't think it's going to get it. Trust is actually natural. The more we let go and we just allow life to unfold for us, there's just that trust that things are going to unfold. And I'm not going to say they're going to unfold in the best possible way, because that would be a judgment. There's a lot of people get into that sort of stuff, that, you know, if it hasn't worked out, then you're not at the end of the story. It's like there's a lot of really rough stuff that's happened on this planet, and it continues to happen on this planet to people. So all we can ever really do is just be here now and be at peace with this now moment as best as we can. To do anything else is just going to continue to make us really feel unhappy and uncomfortable, when most of us aren't in any sort of real threat. We're made to have that space of interaction and, you know, taking flight or fighting and that sort of thing. It's really a fight or flight mechanism that's really gone haywire. Hi, Jonathan. He's saying what you said about old stories really resonates, and to do that a lot, letting old memories or looking at old photos never helps. When we deal with old issues, Jonathan, we want that to come up from within. And so it's not like you thought about it to really brought it up. It's more like something sort of started to move. And you felt this in some of our sessions where it starts to come up. You start to breathe into it. And it's like something opens. You know, like whatever was inside emerges. Whatever. So that's when a memory that we're decharging is coming up and is coming out. And then there's this interesting space of release that's, if you haven't felt it before, is very, very unique. Thanks for your comment. Hi, Patty. What about when you seem to keep repeating a pattern in a relationship, despite investing tons of energy in digging out old issues that seem to be triggering them? Keep digging, it can be exhausting, it feels counterproductive sometimes. But it's still a question of, like, why are you in that relationship? You know, and this takes me right back towards these other things around social programs that say you're supposed to have a romantic relationship. You don't. You don't need one. You can choose to have one, but that's not what most people are doing. And you can try and talk yourself into believing that you're choosing a relationship, but you know the truth in your heart. There's a lot of hard coding that goes on starting early on that says that you're supposed to be in a romantic relationship. So I always like to encourage people to just keep looking at what you're trying to get. And of course, with relationships, you match up the people with your initial impressions of your parents, because your parents are giving you kind of your base idea of how people should interact and love relationships, or whatever your initial people were who were in your life, because everybody was raised differently. You know, if it was grandparents who were raising you, then those are the ones to kind of look at, to pay attention to, like, what are the themes and behavior patterns that were going on there, and are they going on in this one that's, you know, feeling very toxic. The beauty of powerful relationships is also there's a lot of ease to them, that you don't really have to try that hard to make them work. If you're making something work, sounds like the ego at work. There definitely is effort in relationships, right? And we're not talking about it's all easy and orgasms, right? But there's a quality of ease to relationships that align well, that are mutually supportive. So I hope that's useful, Patty. Hi, Amanda. want to make sure that when I'm sitting with an emotion that is coming up, that I'm also not inadvertently feeding or believing the story. Can you expand on that? Yeah, I mean, that's just part of our practice of getting used to it, because this isn't something we're taught from day one, right? We're taught from early on you're supposed to have a romantic relationship, but we're not taught from early on to watch emotions arise with awareness, right? Who was taught that growing up? I mean, if I have kids someday, they will be, but for the most part, we're not. So believing in the story is simply believing it, that it matters, that you need to fix it or feel better about it or change it, or it shouldn't have happened, right? Those are all qualities of believing something, or you want it back, right? This is how we can make good relationships toxic, right? It could have been a great relationship for 5 years and then it ended. Whatever the relationship, could be a business partnership that ends, it could be a romance, it could be a spiritual teacher relationship, all those types of things. But then part of us goes into that strange nostalgia thing that people like. It's a strange kind of sad, regretful place that some people like to inhabit. You're feeling that come up, right? And then you start to see, how can I get this back, right? So that also gets you caught up in loops. But it really takes you again back to this, like, am I trying to get something? Or am I really just witnessing the story? Am I just feeling the emotion? And it's a practice, Amanda. We're all practicing, like, okay, so here's this emotion. Am I still believing in it? Is there still something I want here? Am I still replaying it? Thank you for your question. Hi, Jackie. Sometimes I feel like I would rather not be in a romantic relationship, and I think about my children, how that might affect them, and it keeps me where I am. Right. So you have beliefs that changing a situation would be bad. That's essentially what you just said there, and those beliefs that you may have to confront. We can't predict the future, but we do this a lot through the ego. This is another element of why journaling is really powerful, because then you start to dig into it. So why can't I change? Like, there are so many different ways things can work out in life. We're not, pioneers living with like a husband. It's a husband, wife, or partner, or whatever, in the middle of nowhere. And if you were to leave, you literally would have to walk like 500 miles someplace else to another location in a time when there wasn't like clean running water and healthcare and all those types of things. I'm bringing this out to kind of show you some of the desperation that ego will do, the way you box yourself in to these different beliefs. It's not about running to a better relationship. It's not about making things perfect in life. So this is another reason why you'll hear teachers say, just stay quiet too. Like, if these beliefs and these things are surfacing, write them down, get them out. Don't let them hide, but then just stay quiet. See how peaceful you can be. See how much of your own inner choices to be unhappy or to want to change, what are they actually really about? Where are they coming from? Don't let all that hidden stuff hide anymore. Thank you for your comment, Jackie. Hi, Angeli. When you get to a point where so many people have hurt you that you can no longer project on someone, I just feel a sense of indifference and caution with new people now. What are your thoughts? I was talking about romantic relationships, but interested what you think about this, friends, coworkers, etc. Well, this goes back to the beginning thing where I said that as far as emotions go, right, we're not talking physical harm. Physical harm is a different animal. Whenever those things are going on, my general caveat is you should leave. But as far as emotional hurt, that's you. That's your choice. And if people really are being that mean towards you, why are you hanging around them? There's a lot of elements of like things you're still trying to get, and they need to be seen. Because in healthy relationships, they're just kind of free flow, and that also involves being able to appropriately set our boundaries so that other people know. Because boundary setting really is just communication. You're just saying, hey, this is not appropriate for me. This is appropriate for me. That's all it is. I think sometimes that gets made into a really big deal. We're going to set boundaries. And it's just really you saying like, oh, I need time for my own space. And so having that, then you come back together and you enjoy each other some more, whether it's a friendship, coworker, or whatnot. By closing up and going into that numb place of indifference, then you actually feel less, which means you can't tell if a relationship is healthy or unhealthy anymore. You've effectively turned off your radar. So the spiritual path would become more and more resensitized. being resensitized allows us to be sensitive to life. It's very simple. Now, there's obviously a lot of noise and toxic junk in life, and you can't run away from it all. And being open will tend to further your own work, where there's parts of you that are being overly sensitive to things that have nothing to do with you. The clearer we are, any energies of life that are flowing at us just pass straight through. And there has to be something inside that gets hit, and then an inner response that gets upset. And part of like all of our work is we start to notice, oh, something inside is getting hit and upset. What does that mean? What am I holding on to? What am I looking for? And then it just becomes clearer in general. It's like, what things in our lives really are supporting us, what nourishes us. This is the maturing on the spiritual path. We start to look more at what's naturally nourishing us and what's depleting us. And it's very simple. But let's not rush there. There's enough ego agendas hiding out inside. So my general recommendation, Angeli, is to not close up. See what's inside that's still getting or feeling hurt or choosing to feel hurt. Find out why. And then keep making space for new people to show up in your life, new mirrors, new ways of understanding yourself. I hope that's helpful. We're winding down to one or two last questions. And you're welcome, Jackie. Welcome, Angeli. If anybody hasn't checked the blog, kind of getting up to about I'll do 2 new posts 1 week, and then I'll do like a post and a blog or a webinar announcement on the other weeks. So Wednesday seems to be one of the days where I'll be posting. And so here we'll get to talk about sleep and awakening. I'm actually having kind of an interesting round with that again for myself. Well, Jadra, if you read depleted on anything to break down, emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally, it doesn't feel good. And ultimately it means you're cut off. When we're really connected to life, we flow and we're fully supported. Maybe not in the sense that the ego would like to be supported and a lot of our ideas about what being supported should look like, but we're supported. What do you want to know about guilt? It's kind of self-blame. Yeah, I mean, guilt from the past is just a type of shame. It's hiding some other sort of pain, self-judgments in there. It's something to journal about, really. I think most of all, with powerful relationships, don't be afraid of them when they come in the external form, and don't be afraid of your own power of opening up, because that's a big thing. But we actually are afraid of being alive, being really in love. And it triggers all kinds of things, especially on the romantic stuff, because some soulmates and twin flames aren't meant to be romantic. And so all that inner programming will get illuminated in those spaces with somebody who's powerful enough to draw that out, and then you're in a space where you're powerful enough to draw that out in them. Because the true powerful relationships are reciprocal. There's a lot of energy that flows. If somebody's really open and fully in their love, like they can receive all of that, and it doesn't necessarily shift them as visibly as somebody who's more closed down. The person who's more closed down tends to have more stuff getting churned up inside of them. So I appreciate all of you joining me today. Thanks to those of you who've already donated. And for those who would like to support me, the donation button is over here on the blog that I just highlighted. And I'm always open to new topics that you might want to see on the blog, although I would point you towards my how to find things blog post that's on the awakening and the starting up sections, because there's multiple different ways to search things, and it explains how I've organized the blog. And additionally, there's this little search bar down here that I re-added in, because before it seemed like it was making the page slow down and loading. So the last thing I see here is from Jackie. Based on my questions or answers, it seems like I need to work on not projecting a sense of being better. I do not feel as if this is what I'm doing, and I really do not want to do that at all. I feel I'm a very empathetic, sympathetic, understanding person. What can you suggest for me to help me with this? That's kind of like the saying before. It's like looking at what you want, because there's a whole lot of hidden assumptions inside, and that will help to kind of bring them out. And that's just part of getting to know ourselves. None of this means that, any of us are bad people. It's just ignorance. And ignorance is what we don't know about ourselves. And as the spiritual path teaches us, coming to light means we get to see all of ourselves and embrace all of ourselves. And if there's any part that we can't see, then it's a part of us that we're separated from, and that reduces our own inner power. So all this is really meant to do is to help you let go and be in the power and the love that you already are. And then you can more fully appreciate and receive the power and the love that's around you. So please use what's useful and let the rest wash away. These are just my words, my expression. And have a beautiful rest of your day, afternoon, and evening. You're welcome, Deidre. I'm glad you like the Pure Soul show. You're welcome, Artie. Thank you. You're very welcome, Jackie. Thanks for having the courage to talk to me here and to hear what I have to say. And as I said, use what's going to work for you and let the rest wash away. But make sure you're listening to what resonates. It's all right, Gina. Yeah, the clocks have changed here. You're welcome, Angela.